case. Excuse the graphical error right here. I don't know what just happened. Maybe something's changed with my streaming platform. Um, yes, this is Casabez again. We've been doing this Meridian World News for a couple months now, trying to really dig into the news and give a critical analysis of what's happening. We've showed videos, we've showed articles, we've showed photos, all of things that's happening being publicized in the media, mainstream and alternative sources, and given some analysis on all that. We've given interviews as well of people who have information pertaining to what we've been talking about. Some of the conversations I've been having lately within my circles, especially on social media, have been kind of discouraging. If you've been following our publications, our broadcasts rather, you know that we've given a lot of attention to COVID-19. I've been questioned multiple times by people as to why I keep going on social media and posting about COVID-19. People have been saying that I've been, downplaying the danger of the disease is dangerous. It makes people think that, they'll be safe when in fact their life is at risk and so on. I had to take some time and think about how to respond to all of this. I had to take some time to think about how to respond to really the lack of openness I've seen amongst people who I've tried to, reason with and present information to. And so this new series that the Meridian World News is launching today is called The Critical Eye. It's to give really some, to critique some of the mainstream opinions that I'm seeing. And this is going to be a series. And for now, we're going to focus on COVID-19. And this is going to be a multi-part series. So stay tuned for upcoming segments of this series. If you aren't already, please, if you're interested in hearing more, like the page, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook, like the page, subscribe to the page or follow the page so that you'll see our updates. The first topic I want to talk about is the general approach that I've seen people have to COVID-19. I'm going to be skipping over certain topics that I'm planning to get back to, so please bear with me. I don't want these segments to be too long. They're going to be, if I have to, get into everything, this is going to be 2 hours of me talking. I know nobody's going to sit and watch for 2 hours, so bear with me while I kind of, just cut to the chase on what we're going to talk about today. So when it comes to COVID-19, I wanted to address the main strategy, the main idea that people have as far as what to do about it. Now, of all the, ways that we could think about trying to, protect ourselves, our loved ones, and our communities from this, what appears to be a new disease. The only thing that our modern leaders, I guess, political leaders, scientific leaders, medical leaders, those who are really at the forefront of decision making and policy, whether it be in the United States or in other places in the world, the main solution has been social distancing. A, limiting the number of people that can gather. B, limiting the amount of closeness that you can have to other people. And C, through the face masks, limiting the amount of airborne pathogens in the air. Um, that's the idea anyway. All that with the goal of slowing the transmission down. And I say slowing it down because when the first social distancing measures were put in place, closing bars, closing schools, and things of that nature, before, non-essential businesses had to close and restaurants, before face masks became something that's required for people to wear, and even legally now, it's become a misdemeanor already in Washington State not to wear a mask in public. Before all of that, the stated goal was to flatten the curve, which means that if this is the curve of, the rate of transmission increasing, slow that curve down so that, maybe it can flatten off and, it'll be still new cases, but it won't be too many for our hospital system to handle. So fast forward now, we're now in July 2020, from the initial lockdowns in March, mid-March. Now this is 3.5 months. And we have millions of documented cases in the United States. And this is just people who have been tested. So if you can imagine, that based on the fact that everyone who had it doesn't even show symptoms, a person who doesn't show symptoms has no reason to go get a test most of the time. So most people likely have not been tested. Most people who have gotten the disease likely have not been tested. So, maybe 5 times, maybe 10 times the number of people who have tested positive actually have it. So now we're talking about tens of millions of people who either have it or have had it, and either, recovered from it or died from it. So that being the case, the probability of, and this just now being what I'm talking about, millions just in the United States alone, we're not talking about the whole world. Now, with that being the case, the probability of containment of the disease to where people are not going to get it at some point in time is pretty much zero. I mean, very, very small, unless they die first. I don't know how a person is going to avoid getting it, just like I don't know how a person is going to avoid ever having to deal with a cold. You see, it's the same type of transmission that we're talking about. So then the question is, if containment, stopping the spread and preventing people from ever catching it, because what people are basically functioning on the premise now is that the problem is people are catching it. But if we function on that premise, then we have to admit that people are going to catch it at some point, probably. Now, if people are probably going to have to catch it at some point, then the question is, aside from containment of the disease, what other option do we have to protect ourselves? So the part that's missing from the conversation now is the fact that you have what we call the fatality rate. The fatality rate is how many people out of people out of 1,000 or so. The percentage of people out of 100. That's what percent means, per 100. Per 100 people, how many people are going to die? Per 1,000 people, whatever, how many people are going to die of those who catch it? Now, if you assume that people are going to catch it, what's your chance of dying from COVID in general? Now, that death rate is something that people are kind of like looking at like a hard number. Like we just trying to find out the death rate, how many people are going to die. Somehow the logic escapes our thinking that death rate may have something to do with with factors that can be affected, that we can actually affect the death rate depending on how we respond. So what we know right now is that the vast majority of people who are dying from COVID-19 are dying because I'm not going to say because, they are dying while also having pre-existing conditions such as diabetes, cancer, pneumonia, COPD, heart problems, so on and so on, so on, so on. So there's the general health of the people before they catch it. That's one. Number two is the care that they get when they catch it. These are the two, I'm not going to say the only, but I say these are the two main considerations that I would give to this, question as to how we can affect the death rate. Because if we can't stop people from getting it eventually, how do we protect people? Now, the main thing that is being, I guess, advised, or let's say, promised, is a vaccine. One is the vaccine. Two is, different companies are working on drugs that can be used. So let's examine these two. Now, I've heard, and again, I'm not going to make this a hard claim because I don't know for sure. I don't know a whole lot about vaccines. I don't take vaccines. I don't give vaccines to my children. I'm not interested in vaccines. But for those who are, you may be interested to, look into whether or not any coronavirus, because coronaviruses are something that have been around, or let's say that science and the medical field has been aware of for about 60, 70 years. You'd be interested to know whether there has ever been a vaccine for a coronavirus, any coronavirus, let alone a new one. And from what I hear, there hasn't been one. Now, again, if you're inclined, you can look it up if you're interested in getting a vaccine. I'm not. Also, I don't take pharmaceutical drugs, but if you are interested to take pharmaceutical drugs, you'd be interested to know that many doctors and pharmacists and researchers have been experimenting, trying with different treatments, because they have to do something when they're treating people in the hospital. And there are treatments that people have come out and said time and time again work. Okay, they work. So when it comes to treatment, and hydroxychloroquine, the one that, basically came under fire because the president endorsed it, so those who can't stand Trump or think everything he says is a lie, automatically will think that that must not be the solution, because that's what he said could be a solution. Now, he's since stopped talking about it. However, there are many studies and reports and doctors who have come out and said that that works, that has worked for them in real life and real practice. And other supplements such as zinc and vitamin C, and I heard vitamin A. I've heard a lot of different things. Okay, but these are not the things that we're presented with in the media when they're telling us beware of COVID. They're not telling us that we're not sure. Well, you haven't done these long 18-month studies to prove that hydroxychloroquine works, or certain combinations of drugs and supplements and so on work. However, they could at least say that there are reports that these drugs are working, these supplements are working. This is not what's being reported by your CNN, by your Washington Post, by your New York Times, and these, media facilities. All it says is, oh my God, there's so many new cases in Florida and all these other places. So that's missing from the conversation, the treatment. Now, what's completely missing, because most of us have at least heard of some of these drugs that have been used and some of these different treatments that have been used. What's completely missing from this conversation is, why in the world do you have so many countries that are, countries with millions of people, mind you, countries with huge cities the size of New York or larger, or at least the size of Chicago, millions of people just in the cities, and countries that are considered to be impoverished, countries that are considered to have, poor healthcare systems. Why in the world are there so many of these countries that have low death rate, death counts, such as maybe double or triple digits, in the tens or hundreds, okay, when you can have the tens or hundreds of deaths in one city in the US in one day? In the whole COVID experience, these places have not had even a single, let's say some of them don't have a single death for a week. They to, like, Tanzania is considered itself to be COVID free. Now, some people will say, oh, it's the weather. These places are normally more equatorial. They're more, warmer climate, and because of the warmth or whatever. But it's summertime now. People are still dying in the United States. In one day, you have more deaths than the whole Africa has in 6 months. So that doesn't hold water. And then too, places like Brazil, that's warm climate all the time. There's many deaths in Brazil, many deaths in India as well. Lots of deaths. India is a crowded country. So what are these places doing differently? And, again, I'm saying herbal treatments are showing themselves to be effective. You have researchers in Madagascar who came up with this, what's called COVID organic, which has been used throughout, I'm not going to say throughout, but in many places in Africa, and they're saying that it works well. And when you have people dying by the thousands, what's wrong with trying something that someone else who has a much better track record than you, trying what they have to say, what has worked for them? The reason why is because if the modern medical system has to humble itself to admit that it doesn't have the answer for something, and then has to turn to a so-called third world country for the answer, and the answer happens to be something that the pharmaceutical corporations do not have a patent on, then that is the beginning of the end for the credibility for the modern medical system. Because they will have to publicly admit that they are, they don't have the answers, and that someone has far beaten them as far as coming up with solutions. Now that's more costly to these, owners of these corporations than however many lives have to be lost. But those of us who are paying attention have to admit, one thing COVID is showing us is that the healthcare system has completely failed. The healthcare system of the United States, the modern healthcare system that's being used all over the world, the pharmaceutical industry, or maybe the medical industrial complex, however you want to call it, has completely failed. Because one, people are dying because their health is already bad. Now, if you call yourself a healthcare system and you purport yourself to be the only authority on health, the only authority that has the right to say this is scientifically the way you come about solving medical problems. Because legally, if you're not, backed by the scientific system, you can get in trouble just for saying, oh, I have the cure for this disease, even if you have cured a disease. So when you put yourself in that position to say you're the authority to say what is, the right way to go with regards to health, we are the professionals, we are the knowledgeable ones, then people, you've already taken on the responsibility for people's lives who's in this, country, or in whichever country is under the authority of that medical system. You are the legally, that's your responsibility. But however, we don't talk about that. We're not talking about how people are not given proper advice for how to eat. They're not given proper, treatment for when they get sick. People are pumped full of drugs, given lifetime prescription, or I like to call it lifetime sentence on certain drugs that they have to take, because they say, oh, there's no cure for this, but we can keep your symptoms under control. They want to keep your symptoms under control for the rest of your life until you die. And then these medicines don't even, at the same time, while they're not curing you, they're adding another, what they call side effect, which is another form of sickness. You got people who have cancer and they die from the cancer treatment before they die from the cancer. Which kind of treatment is this? But yet, this complete and utter failure of the modern medical system is not part of the conversation, of course. The complete and utter failure to have people's immune system strong enough to resist a virus or a sickness like this is not part of the conversation. The complete and utter failure of the government or the medical field in general to bring a solution to people who are catching this disease is appalling. I have a friend who caught it. I know one person who caught COVID. Okay, she's a worker at a hospital in the Chicago area, and she caught it, presumably at work. She was sent home. She was told, because she has asthma, that she should use her inhaler, which is what she does anyway for her asthma. So there's no solution being given to this young lady at all. You see, for her to take, there's no advice being given to people who get it and have to quarantine at home. No solution at all. Then when they're brought in the hospitals, they're put on ventilators. And we've heard, if you're paying attention, many people have come out and said publicly that somewhere around 89% of people who are put on ventilators end up dying. Now, if we're alarmed because of the potential of this disease that maybe 1% of those who get the disease die, we should be extremely alarmed about the idea that 90% of people who receive treatment for this disease are dying. Because if 1%, and this is again, like I'm saying with cancer, you get cancer, the treatment kills you before the disease does. You have to understand what being put on a ventilator means. They shove a tube down your throat. In order, understand what you have a gag reflex. Nothing is supposed to make it down your throat even a centimeter. And yet they're shoving a foot-long tube down your trachea. That's what they call it, trach. You get trached. Or maybe that's when they put it actually directly into your neck as trach. But you get what they call intubated. They put a tube down your windpipe. And then in order to do that, they have to heavily sedate you with narcotics and paralytics. Now, we already have a huge problem in this country of people dying from overdose of narcotics. And you've heard of the opioid crisis. Now you're pumping these people full of opioids. I was researching and looking at videos from doctors. One doctor is saying, we don't want the person to even remember what happened when they woke up. They need to be that heavily sedated. Now, to be sedated to that point, that's already extremely destructive to the body. Again, The treatment is worse than the disease itself. 80 to 90% of people dying on ventilators is much worse than possibly up to as high as 1% of people dying untreated. There's no comparison. You see, the disease that many people get it and don't even have symptoms shouldn't be so bad that all these people going on ventilators end up dying. So again, we're seeing again the failure on a massive scale, on a catastrophic scale of the medical system. This is not a result of this horrible new plague that's come on the scene suddenly. Our reaction to it has been the problem. So that's what's missing from the conversation, you guys. What is the solution for when you catch the disease? Because you can't expect that you're just going to be able to, until 2025, walk around with masks on, or, until they come out with a vaccine. And mind you, there are many people who are going to resist taking the vaccines. So for those people who do not consent to that, the option are you going to force them to inject an unknown substance into their bodies in the name of protecting themselves from the less than 1% possibility of dying from this disease? Or do you accept the fact that if everybody doesn't take it, then you're still going to continue to see the spread? And if you're going to continue to see the spread, obviously we have to know what to do when we get it. Why are we not talking about this? So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Again, I'm going to be coming with some more critical analysis of COVID and the response to it. But that's it for today. Signing off, this is Kasabez Makma again. Peace.